Hey everybody, if you're hearing this, it's February 9th. We just got the latest chapter, Interlude 1 Hectval, and we're going to be discussing it today. Second. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to do a quick summary, and then we'll jump right into first thoughts. Hectval gets slapped by Liscor's Big Dick Energy Antinium Crusaders. Manus goes, "Nuh-uh, girl," and then shoves a 10-foot spear up Liscor's ass. Bruised and sore, Liscor decides to bring in a ringer, the furry man Minotaur. That's the summary for the chapter. Y'all good? We're good? Alright. Let's get some volunteers for thoughts on what happened. Everyone can post in the reaction and comments. I want to try something a little bit new today as well. I have two questions that I want everyone to consider, and we're going to discuss them at the end of near the end of the recording. I want to give everyone as much time as possible with this, and oftentimes folks don't necessarily have the ability to look through the document and peruse and think about question answers very quickly. These are structural questions, they're not character based. So, one, did you enjoy the new way Pirate was structuring the chapter with headlining each of the POVs, the way they transitioned from one POV to the other? Pirate specifically pointed out during stream and later on in the author note that they were trying a new structure and a new way to present them. And as an addendum to that, do you think this kind of structure would have been helpful in the older books in helping you to more easily understand what the hell is going on? Think about it. Do not answer now. Right now, we're going to talk about wrap up. So just think about those two questions, and we'll get back to it. Okay, Mr. Wiggles, you're going to be first up for reactions. And what did you think of the chapter?
It was a good chapter. I really enjoyed the war story aspect of it. I've always been a big fan of those types of stories and seeing it, kind of seeing that kind of genre and the Wandering Inn is really cool. I also just loved Belgrade's scene in the end. It was a very impactful scene, I felt like. And overall, I, it just was a fantastic chapter, and I'll get into a part of why I thought that way when we go over that question you just mentioned, because that was definitely part of it.
Okay. Anybody else? You can type stuff. I'm going to give you all a few more minutes, 30, 40 more seconds to just react. And in the meantime, I'm going to talk about my own reaction. I did have one specific moment of um, where I truly did enjoy. I really did enjoy it because usually I don't. In the last couple of months, I've avoided watching the streams in a continuous manner. I would come in, check it out. I do typo stuff, so I would help with the typo stuff, and then I back out and read the whole thing when it gets published. This one I followed along fairly closely because I read a lot of space opera and military fiction and nonfiction and military science fiction, and this hits the right balance for me. It's a war story. It does try to represent. This is TWI version. Let's not mistaken things. It's Pirates version of this, but it's very much a war story. It's the way it's written, and it's done well, and the structure of it. This seems mean to say. Like, there was a lot of pushback when I said this. It's predictable, but predictable isn't bad if you can execute it really well, and Pyre can execute it really well. I understood the. It's the same thing with the prior heist story. They're following a well trodden path, but making it their own and representing it the way they want it, and creating characters and sparking connections that are otherwise not possible. I really do enjoy that. And war stories have this thematically. It's generally the same. I mean, the horrors of war, the glories of it, the way we glorify it, and the truth of it versus the mystery. Sorry, the tales we tell to each other and how we deal with it and what it's like being part of an active army. And I think Pirate did a pretty good job and seems to have a good grasp on how to do that. Okay, we've got a bunch of folks uh, who have responded. So Pandromine goes, that Belgrade scene was baller. Yep, I love that scene. Polaric says question 6. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. If you want to clarify, please post. Lewd Dancer goes, I felt the tension throughout the chapter. Although I didn't necessarily anticipate Manus being the one to slap around Lascor's army, but to me, the chapter was screaming the whole time, people are going to die soon. I couldn't really relax during the chapter, even though it was mostly light. Did anybody else get that vibe? Yeah, I did. It was. I mean, that's what war stories are. It's always waiting for the axe to fall, and that's what it's like being in war. You spend a lot of time hurrying up to get to nowhere, and then there's like all this waiting, and then the axe falls, and you have this tense moments, and it's that's how you end up with PTSD because you're always having to be at that high level of readiness because your life is at risk, and yet it's only for these short bursts of time. But that's my opinion. If somebody else has something different. Adrian Gray, hi, welcome. Great chapter. Love the war story. Anything involving Intinium is great. Love the new ant perspectives and progression on the Hectval plotline. I I love the Antinium so much. Anything with the Antinium is always great for me. I'm with you there, man. But I did have a little bit of pushback. I was reading folks like Nobody, Quilly, and a few others were talking about how the new um, perspectives offered by the Crusader 51, 53, and the variety of different new perspectives of the Antinium were retreading well-trodden ground of a la the how um how Antinium storylines have been presented, and that they don't really connect with it in that sense. A lot of it was the older characters were being connected to, but the newer ones just weren't feeling it. And I don't know if it was like that for you guys. Did you guys feel that? Did anyone feel like that? It's cool if you didn't. It's just a thought. Um, and Cal, in response to Lou Dancer's question, says, in retention, yes, there was definitely a sense of waiting for the axe to fall. Agreed, agreed. Pandromine says, I think the head hopping works because it gives us a view of list score in its entirety. Oh, this is in response to my question. Just yeah, I'll save that for later. Let me just see if I can mark it. So save for later. Oh well, fine. I'll save this for later. Okay. Does anyone else have any reactions to the story or to anything in particular that they want to talk about or mention? Did they feel anything? Were there perspectives that jumped out to them? Okay, and Lynette responded to my question about the a non-connection with the news stories and says, "My opinion, the readers, after 9 million words, are likely jaded on the war front. I like being reminded of the new perspective. War is bad. We should not want it." And this is in response to Valderon, who posted, wartime stories sort of lend themselves to multi-perspective vignettes. Those scenes can also usually get away with moments of intimacy between characters that normally wouldn't associate without jumping the shark. So in that way, it's a good way to push character development in a hurry without it feeling forced. In another way, it's a good way to emotionally exhaust people. Is that what Parrot's trying to do? Emotionally exhaust us? Uh, No, I said you could talk in general. I never said I wasn't going to read out what happens in general. And a DM Craft says Crusader ants are just another painted Antinium POV. Arthur Flagbearer was the only new take on the ants. That is very true. The Crusader ants are just more painted Antinium. And it did make me wonder, where in the hell is Yellow Spatters? Where is Purple Smiles? Where are Chisakri and Thana? Where the fuck are all of the painted Antinium? Like, these guys are supposed to be super like important. Are they all needed to maintain the hives? They may not be crusaders, but where are they in this chapter? Is Pirate keeping them back for some reason? Kel says I was very anxious for 51 and 53 and Arthur, and actually fist pumped over Calruse. I didn't fist pump over Calruse, um, but I really liked the way they were presented in the end of the chapter. It was done very well. Lynette says they're with the Kintons. I assume that's the Happy Crusaders, but why is there not like heavier squads? Its savior says, I think they're too valuable. You can lose the Crusaders, they are expendable. That's true from Zern's perspective. I'm not sure anyone they think of that. Lewd Dancer says this is a different take on the Antinium. This is not what you mean by emotional spectrum, because they're still very on the same scale as the rest of us. DM Crest says this is them making new ants. No need to risk the ants they have already leveled. This is them leveling up the Crusaders. I would agree that Zern, certainly Three Queen, would see it in that perspective, and that's probably why they're pushing this. All right, Rosie, you're up.
I just kind of wanted to say, I think to me it's really interesting. I see a lot of parallels happening with this new version of Antidium with their righteous cause and the Earthers who come expecting to be heroes. That idea of being in wonder at the world, the idea of feeling invincible, the youthfulness of it. I don't know. I just see a lot of really interesting parallels, which is maybe why to me it doesn't feel like it's retreading the same ground as the Painted Antidium. While the world was new and wonderful to them, and it was also childlike, I see the bringing those ideas of wanting to be a hero, of wanting to fight for something to these Antinium, especially the ideas of jealousy and things. It just to me feels like it is a very different part of that emotional spectrum, and that it is in some ways reflecting other experiences we've seen, but in the Antinium, which is part of what the Antinium are. They are ultimately experiencing things that every other species and person has. So for me, it's interesting to see that this, in a way, is them experiencing the Earther experience of thinking you're not going to die because the world is great, which is wild because we know the Antidium always expect to be expendable and die. So I thought that was just really interesting to me, and I want to see more of them.
Okay. Mr. Wiggles?
This is in reply to your thing about yellow splatters and all of the rest.
Files, yeah,
Just
yeah.
yeah, just like keep in mind this is completely a voluntary mission. Like every crusader who is here volunteered to be here. And I think that yellow splatters, purple smiles, those types of people, they were affected by Aaron and they grew from being involved with Aaron, but they see Pawn and Belgrade and Anod and the other Antinium as more of their focus. So instead of volunteering for this mission, they want to stay with the hive and continue protecting the hive.
That could very well be true. I want to talk about something that Valderon just posted because it made me think about it. And then we're going to dive back into the questions. And before I do that, Adrian Gray posted the new Antinian Perspectives, Crusader 51 and 53, who I'll hereafter just refer to as 51 and 53, do retread a lot of ground when it comes to Ant storylines. There's that same sense of wonder at discovering the wider world, kindness, love, and foods that aren't Soylent Green. In my mind, what 51 and 53 add that's new is this newfound sense of anger, even selfishness. Their story is centered around the idea of something being stolen from them and being righteously pissed about it. That's not something we've seen before from a non individual Antinium, and it's something I really enjoy from Crusaders in general. They're a normally faceless, emotionless horde rising up in rage, and it gives me goosebumps every time. And even as they do that, they're still doing the classic, adorable, sad Antinium thing of discovering the world. They get so damn excited about yogurt. My heart. Smiley face emoji. To me, Lou Dancer says a lot of the Antinium stories are a waking up discovery, almost a coming of age. Not innocence, because they too experience loss, but still a more protective, positive lens of the world. Not hatred, but fear or love driving their fighting. These Antinium hated Hectval so hard they made a combined skill. When I say emotional spectrum, I'm talking about what kind of emotions are being the main drivers of their actions. Okay, those are some excellent points, guys. And I'll repeat what Valderon said in general chat. I was washing dishes. The conversation moved past this, but I took Crusader 51 being new as a golden opportunity to murder someone and show the horrors of war without losing a character Pirate intends to develop. Feel a little ambiguous about their survival. I guess it will be good if he died. It would have been a pretty good beat to show the futility of the Antinium experience. Um, I mentioned this because that's another thing. Is part of Do you guys think these new characters are as expendable? Is there also maybe a part of us that are probably like refusing to connect to these characters for fear that they'll get killed off? Um, it just feels like maybe that might also be acting as a little bit of a barrier to connecting to them. But who knows? We have two more chapters, two more parts. We'll see where that lands. And Kelsa is saying it's similar to Erebus in Rame. Who the fuck is Erebus? Okay, keep in mind, guys, my Flow/K chapter remembrance is about as good as water. I pretty much don't remember anything. Oh, seeing the in the med perspective, the hemp soldier who stormed. Okay, I see. Yeah, I couldn't tell you anything. There are weaknesses to everyone, and that's mine. Can we? Okay, I'm gonna leave the Dolly Parton bashing pirate about Dolly Parton to later because okay, we're gonna dive into a few questions. So, Whitebeard Forever, if you're here in the chat, yeah, you are. I'm gonna go through your questions as a combination. They're about the skills that have been revealed. So, Whitebeard asks, "Will Aaron or the other surviving members of the chess club have a boosting effect on Belgrade's new green skill? If so, what kind?" And he also asks, do we think Belgrade and Aaron will eventually get a combination skill if he uses his skill squad, the chess club stand, in the garden surrounded by the statues of the chess club itself? Maybe if pawn brings back the spirit. Essentially, he's talking about he or she or they are talking about um, what would happen if this new green skill was used in conjunction with the other surviving members of the chess club, or possibly with Erin herself. Any opinions from folks? Whitebeard, do you wanna? I guess you're typing, so you want to speak. Hold it out. If you're Hellfire Blues, if you want to react, put it in the reaction comment section because I gotta bounce back. But Hellfire Blue says it's going to do anything. If it's going to do anything, it's going to be a last stand skill. Yeah. Lou Dancer said, I don't think Erin would combine with this skill. I think she would loathe it because it reminds her of a real emotional low. Whitebeard Forever comments, we will eventually need very overpowered skills to help fight the gods. To me, this is a possible avenue for that kind of power. That's a that's a point of view, like the combination of various skills received, try to present that. Yeah, that could definitely be happening. All right, I'm letting Adrian Gray finish, and then we're gonna move on to another question. Okay, these are all about Manus, so I'm going to combine them a little bit. So Manus's entry into the war changed things. How much more is Manus going to put into this? How, if at all, will other walled cities react to Manus interfering in the war? And where's the other one? How can the how can Manus's offensive best be countered? So what do you guys think? What does everybody think of how Manus itself was presented in the chapter? Do you think they can do it? Personally, I have no fucking clue how they're gonna fight Manus because you're talking about an elite squad. They could just fucking withdraw if there's any risk. And from the perspective of Zern, as has been implied, um, throwing a bunch of ants at them is just fine until the ants or Antinium are like, uh, what's the word? They find a bunch of leveled units out of it. Just losing a couple tens or 15,000 and then getting like 30 individuals who are able to level would be just fine. From her perspective, it's nothing. And it feels almost like a war within a war. The walled city of Manus is playing games with Zern of the Centinium, and in the between is crushed the Liscorian army and the Hectval alliance. And honestly, it's so familiar to me. That's what happens in geopolitical systems in our world too, like proxy nations and conflicts between larger forces. And oftentimes it ends up creating these bloody conflicts that leave the people involved exhausted and it creates refugee crises and economic crises and harms so many people. Although I'm not sure what kind of harm there will be. It seems like the Drake cities are used to a semi-constant state of war. Adrian Gray says, I'd say there's no way, this is in response to the skill questions, I believe. I'd say there's no way it'll be as simple as just a defense buff. Aside from that, too little information to say for sure. Maybe a sacrifice-based thing, since the original chess club stand was about them sacrificing themselves to protect Aaron. Lewd Dancer says, I think from a meta perspective, it makes sense for one defensive strategy. Screen the Antinium with regular non-Antinium regular soldiers. It does. Um, it's brutal, but even Olasum will eventually be like, this is what I have, and this is what I can use, and the propagators are used to thinking in that perspective. It's definitely possible. Adrian Gray says regarding Manus, I think it'll be less a matter of winning and more a matter of making it too annoying, expensive for Manus to continue. If Manus wanted, they could probably crush Liscor and the Hive, but they won't because it would be way too much trouble, especially with the other walled cities' influence. And the race war, I assume you mean the conflict between the Gnolls and Drakes, Horizon. And also, as Lute Dancer said, the easiest and best way to protect the Crusaders is to stop separating them from the rest of the army. Whitebeard Forever says, I believe Manus is being used narratively to whittle down the Antinium to only the ones we care about, also to help Embria become a Spearmaster. Yes, I very much agree. It's clear that's it's being used as a thresher to extend the life of some of these characters. Lewd Dancer says Manus does not want to fight Liscor's soldiers. It seems it would also have to involve character growth of Liscor's soldiers to be able to protect and acknowledge Antinium as worthy of said protection, if the defensive strategy I mentioned was used. Stady the Survivor says Embria is going to die. I kind of think that might be possible. I don't know. Pirates kind of nice. They don't like killing off too many people. It usually has to serve a purpose, and I don't see a reason to kill off Embria. And we do know that there is that this is in the past, and in the present, Embria is still ostensibly alive. Airface, if you'd like to speak, ping in the reaction and comments channel, and I will give you space to do so. Mr. Wiggles, you had something to say?
Yeah, just about Manus. Just I agree with Edge Dancer. Basically, I feel the best strategy going forward is to incorporate the Antinium into the normal ranks, just to make it so Manus can't exclusively dictate the battles, so that the Antinium are cut off and they're used to they're killed exclusively. Basically, they need to make it so that Manus can't just have their way with the battle, so they need to incorporate the Antinium into the overall structure of the army better.
Okay. That wasn't a comment. I'm reading what someone just wrote. So, Lady of the Survivor says Embria has to die because how else would Relk join the war? Hairface responds and says, I can see Embria dying to motivate Relk and fuel him in some kind of endgame final stand scenario. No. Y'all, no. First off, it fucks with the timeline because he doesn't get back until roughly. I think it's got to be at least 2 months more afterwards because at present he's going through the the issues and problem like what his chapter originally covered. It took a long time for him to return. He can't be involved right away, and unless Pirate decides to push that up point, I don't believe that's possible. And I also think that's kind of cheap. It's a cheap motivational tool, and Pirate's generally not. I mean, they could do it, but it's just timelines for these chapters are very difficult to like parse properly. Pirate has always fudged timelines, and I'm sure they have a headcanon, but it's a whole thing right now. Okay, excuse me. Valderon says, handy that Belgrade got combined arms then if they're going to insert Crusaders into the ranks. Isn't it? Don't you think so? Oh, Hairphrase clarifies, says, I ain't saying in this Hectval arc, I mean more future arc. Okay, that's possible. Yoda says Pirate did say it was 2 months. No, sort of. It was like a week afterwards they got into position, and then they spent 2 months in the trenches. Yes. Adrian Gray says, personally, I think Relk won't join the war at all. I agree. This is Oshi saying I would agree. That would crowd Embria out of her own story and development. From a narrative point of view, that's where I am. Airphrase response. Also, could you re-explain the protocol? Oh, I apologize. You can someone do that, Mr. Wiggles? Can you DM him and do that? We're gonna keep going with the discussion. Okay. So I think that covers Manus. Before I move on, as far as Manus goes, there is very little chance that Manus will directly risk losses. This is for them a scouting mission and a harassing mission. They'll want to remove as much of the new units as possible and to identify how to kill and counter whatever's going on. Uh, unless they lose the Spearmaster, what's his name? Love. Um, I don't think there's any risk of that. Yes, Force Recon is the term Valderon. Rhythm and Bruise, you had a thing to say. Go ahead, Discan.
Yep, I was thinking about this. Is that I don't know how much more just Love's Force on his own is going to be able to do without something else, without more tricks, because I feel like their big advantage and what let them do so much damage initially was that nobody knew they were there, and they could go in and do a bunch before the Fourth Army segment could respond to them, and they didn't really know what to do. And so now that they're kind of more of a known force, I'm I'm not sure what what new trick they're going to have. Is
Yeah, I agree with that. But DM Craft just wrote out what I was gonna say, fiddlesticks. But here we go. He says Embria is going to defeat the Spearmaster and consolidate. My theory: he will survive via ant healing and lead to Manus finding out ants can heal with a capital H, referring to the presence of the acolytes and the faith-based classes. It is. I mean, there is that thread of discovery in it, and that's the whole point of Manus's presence. They're trying to push the Antinium to reveal why the changes, what they're saying. They're doing an assessment of the military potential, mostly because Manus doesn't trust Palace's viewpoint, and nobody likes Chanelion because he's a fucking busybody and he's an old man who has his own plans. Uh, but the overall feeling I got from Manus is that just Lul's narrative point of existence, you immediately think that Embria is going to be able to counter Lul. Love is the equivalent of one of the seven in terms of the power differential between Embria and Love. Even if she does consolidate and level up, I don't see it being something that has to come from Love's presence. I see it as something that's going to come from her interaction and change in point of view. When it comes to the Antinium. I'm hoping for that. I'm hoping for some kind of narrative growth that isn't as much as, hey, there's a really high level person, let's go fight him. Oh, I survived. I leveled up. I protected people. No. I just feel as if that's a little too simplistic. I'll accept it if Pirate wants to go down the what is it, Starship Troopers route, very simple, like easy to know storylines that repeat patterns. But I'd be disappointed if there wasn't a little bit more of an emotional resonance there. Yeah, Raquel says she'll get levels in character growth, but she's not defeating Lull without some pretty remarkable extenuating circumstances, which could happen. Let's be fair. There is that should be good enough. Okay, Hairface, you'd like to speak? Go ahead.
Right. So going back onto what you were saying, like it's definitely not going to be some sort of like weird counter leveling, killing walls sort of scenario that's going to end all this. Like I think this is kind of the direction that Pyre's trying to take this. I think it's the narrative is I think centered around Olisum right now. I think that's where she's going with the whole leadership thing. Like his whole story has always been about like, this awkward, high anxiety dude who sort of comes into his own as a competent leader. I think what we're going to probably see is like it's going to be some sort of like random, big, he has some brilliant idea and there's some weird strategic thing that somehow manages to encircle and defeat the Hectval alliance or something. And I don't think this Evolve guy or whatever, he's going to die or anything. It's probably going to be something like, Embria holds him off for the time being so that they can defeat the rest of the army. And then, they just decide to leave or something like that. Like, it's not going to be this isn't some kind of battle shonen manga. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's all I really had to say.
That's exactly what I was saying. Like, Pirate's not doing shonen manga levels of like character arcs. At least I hope not. Adrian Gray says, I'm not sure if Lull really is that much stronger than Embria. He's strong, sure, but Relk is also a Spearmaster. It's only about gold rank strength. We can assume Lull is similar. Embria isn't too far below that level. That being said, I agree it won't be as simple as Embria beats Lull and gets levels. I would disagree with that. The representation for Lull he's the dude who stands with the dragon speaker of Luciva of Manus. You don't get to that level unless you're maybe not he doesn't have the peerless rank, but he's certainly got to be somebody of significance. You're not talking about just any commander. They wouldn't send just any commander to the kind of risky situation. Not for this kind of first force recon kind of situation where they're just trying to get an idea of everything while also presenting a significant threat that could eliminate them. Checkmaster says Embria going to get massive power spike when she hits a level 30 at the same time. Which brings up another question. Does anyone have an idea about what kind of class she might receive, combining both Spear Hunter and Wing Commander? Do you think she'll just consolidate into just Spearmaster and she'll lose the Wing Commander? And Hairface, you had something to say again?
Oh, right, sure. Yeah, I think there was already some talk a long time ago in like the early volumes about like a consolidation between the Spear Hunter and like some sort of commander class or something like that. But honestly, I don't really see I don't really see what Pirate's trying to do with Embria's growth. Like I personally like, yeah, she's gonna get some kind of, spear master ish class for consolidation, but like I don't really think it matters if Embria scales to anything because I don't really think her becoming strong is that important to the story. I think it's more of like an emotional tie to Relk, who is kind of being built up as some sort of future-esque hero slash juggernaut that we're going to eventually see. And it's her stories have more time to that than her own story of I'm going to be some kind of the hero with the spear going in like Zell. You know what I mean? So yeah, I don't really think this is going anywhere.
So you're saying, do you think we can keep talking about this. You don't have to.
Yeah, sure, sure.
But I'm saying, do you think so? From your perspective, you see Embria's storyline as accessory to Relk's growth, not
Yeah,
as,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
you're saying okay, and you're saying that her growth is a little like opaque to you.
Yeah,
Like you
she's more
think,
of like a side character to like the overall growth of like Liskor as a sprawling city with, complex military structure and
can you
political
give
leadership.
like who else would be equivalent to her in your mind?
Hmm. Well, I think.
In the story, in terms
Okay,
of
I guess
where
in the
you're seeing.
story, I guess it would be kind of like Zavara. She kind of has like more of a political role as like a tie into like the actual army of Liskor, or even like the random guardsmen we hear about, like oh, there's this senior guardsman, who's been there for a while, but he's sort of competent, average-ish, who kind of like he's there in the story, like assisting in the background, sort of thing. Like Pyre kind of has like a bias for like female leaders. I think we'll probably see more of her, and also because of her relationship to Relk. But like, I don't see her personal heroism as central to the story by any means.
Okay. Your Pat says like a Takurnish figure. Baldwin says maybe Kawe. Kawe was sort of ancillary
Yeah,
to.
kind of. Yeah, Kurdish figure. Yeah, sort of that thing.
Okay. So, and Pat came up with an idea for a combined class Spear Commander or Spear Master Commander, I guess.
Yeah, I think there was some talk about like how like Spearmaster and like some sort of command leadership classes don't actually consolidate. And that's why Relk had like Spearmaster and Sergeant for like eons or something. Like
Okay.
apparently there was some sort of path for like Spear Hunter and some sort of commander class to like consolidate, but like it sort of got like that plan got derailed when like Relk killed a Spearmaster and got that class or something. So I think yeah,
Hair
I think
face.
we're all kind of just waiting on what the heck Relk is going to get with his consolidation. Like I don't know,
Hair face.
Protector or I don't know.
Dude, just yeah. Okay, that's fair. Uh, we have Coldbringer saying Embria's character trajectory over this arc is likely supposed to involve her gaining more trust of the Antinium she is fighting alongside, which would make her a heretic in the Liskorian army command structure overall. So we'll see her get a spear commander variant based on her work with fighting alongside Antinium, like Na, the swarm captain, and Cyril Avrir, who got a Null Drake cooperation skills. My prediction, anyway.
That's a
I
great take.
Yes, that is a great take. That is what I think will happen, but that's a solid take. The only issue for me is okay. Taking it back a step, in response to your comment that she's more like an ancillary character, I would I would say that regardless of how ancillary they feel to the main thrust of the storyline, it's important to remember that when they're on the screen, so to speak, to never forget that Pirate is a big believer in giving every character the care and time they need to be to feel and be read as, meaning that this, so I'll use the Luan and Doreen's let's excuse me, Lacan and Doreen. They are, even despite the blandness and criticism of Doreen's character and Lakin's character, they're both distinctly themselves. They have motivations, they have thoughts, and yet they're dependent on each other for the kind of storyline. They're interconnected, but distinctly themselves. And if you see either character alone, you know and feel what you'll get from them. Embria, I think the weakness in Embria is that perhaps she doesn't quite feel that unique yet. Whenever we've seen her, she's always been involved in someone else. I think the closest we got to her inner self was the chapter she looked out for a friend, where she developed a relationship with Relk, and in the process, we got to see her with her unit. I think, if nothing else, the next two chapters might develop Embria away from that kind of mired ancillary zone into a more fully realized character. So look
Yeah.
out that Hairface. Just still, you gotta follow the ping stuff.
Yeah.
When I was saying you don't have to mute, I meant because I was trying to have a conversation with you. You don't have to mute. Okay. Checksmaster and Hairface are typing, so we're gonna do that, and then while they're doing that, I'm gonna move on to the next question unless somebody comes up with something. So there was an interesting question, number 6. It felt like there was a shift in the nature of magical weapons armor this chapter. It used to be that a magical sword had a trick to it. Maybe hit a little harder or was a bit sharper. This chapter seemed to be more along the lines of all magical swords being able to slice through mundane armor and weapons as if they weren't even there. Is this just an interpretation based on an unreliable narrator or a representation of what gear difference looks like when it's presented in mass combat? And while you guys are thinking this over, I'm gonna respond to the question of: do you think Lull polishes his spear nightly? I certainly hope so. I mean, it is adamantium. You might not need to polish it, but I mean, there's probably a volunteer or two involved in it. Does he have like Spearmasters is supposed to be like knight equivalents and duelist equivalents? I assume he has a nubile young person to polish it for him. Just saying. All right, we got some responses and a person who wants to speak. So Checksmaster says Embria gets a nickname Dragon of Liscor to reflect her father's name Gecko of Liscor. Well, on the nose with the dragon thing. I think they don't do that, but we'll see. Uh, I don't think that's just the enchantments. Lou Dancer says. I think that's skills too. Multiple times it was hammered in that Manus' soldiers had the ants out leveled. Um, Personally, I'm on the side of this particular set of magical weapons happening to be enchanted with simple weight penetration enchantments. I don't think they're ignoring normal armor thing is inherent to all enchanted weapons. That's from Adrian Gray. Rosie says, I think the Manus people have pretty good damn enchanted weapons. I'd bet. I'm of the same opinion as Rosie. I think it was just a very high quality set of weapons, and specifically designed to counter armored Antinium, considering what they knew what they were going to face. Adrian Gray says, and yeah, it's probably also due to skill. Coldbringer says, these are cheap, mass-produced enchanted gears. Low grade. They won't have any fancy secondary effect, just reinforcement of the basic function. Hectval isn't a significant enough city to have a high-level enchanter or soldiers with enough levels to be worth the investment. Coldbringer, I think they're referring specifically to Manus' weapons vis-a-vis the fights, not Hectval itself. Yeah, I agree with you that that's Hectval's. They don't have that kind of gear. Yeah, I think it was just a misunderstanding, Checksmaster in Coldbringer's POV. He's right about Hectval, but the question was referring to Manus' weapons. Uh, Wiggles says one of the skills that Lulv used prior to engagement was steel sundering blades. That's very true. It is very specifically mentioned in the chapter. I thought that's what it was. But I point this out because it is interesting to think about the fact that the Antinium soldiers here are experiencing what levels and um, enchanted gear can do to them, and it's very familiar to me because it's what goblins go through, right? Goblins, except they eventually do gain levels, right? And it's a nice parallel, and I wonder if maybe one of the Antinium will, like, if there was a goblin around, that's what I would say they would do, like reach out to the goblins and see how they dealt with it all. But you know, who knows? Numtongue's not around. No one's around to show them how to do things until they are, I guess. Um, let's see. We're hitting the hour mark, so I'm going to wrap it up with two sets of questions. One is, what kind of consolidation do you think a leader and strategist has, and specifically what kind in Olison's case? And while you guys are thinking of answers to that, yes, Hairface, you had something to say?
Oh, actually, I was going to change the subject to something else completely, just because I don't know, like we're kind of like getting bogged down in semantics of classes and levels, and it kind of goes nowhere. But
There are specific questions in a Google Doc that I'm trying to go over.
right,
And I'm using the temporary, like the smaller questions, as a thing for people to have fun with while we take the
Oh,
time.
sure. Yeah, no, it's
to
fine because
out
like yeah, there's sometimes there's not much to talk about. But like, if you want to go off of my question, like that's fine too. But I guess I was kind of speculating as to like we're kind of seeing a lot of this faith-based shenanigans with the Antinian. I'm just wondering like what does chat think, or like what do you think about like what do you think other races will start to interact with like faith-based classes? Like so far, like the Earthers have been like contacted by the gods, but like they haven't exactly adopted any kind of religious class at all. And like I think wasn't there some weird group in Chandra or something that became like some sort of faith monk people or something? Like I'm just wondering how this is going to disseminate to the other groups and how this is all going to like tie back into like the final battle and rear and like do the goblins have any kind of say in this? Does this have anything to do with like their whole past and their whole history and whatever? Like what is going on there? What do you think?
Okay. Textmaster says no, faith is rare. DM Craft responds, no, only the Chandra group has been able to burn through the gods' Gaius. And yes, Valorant responds, that is a meal of a question. And yeah. So we're coming to the end of the hour-long recording, so I'm gonna push that question to post recording. Rosie, you can go ahead and speak while I try to figure out how to end this. Okay, sure. What I wanted to do is go back to the question that I asked so no one has any ideas about what the consolidation might be for Olsum. I'm gonna go with new. Okay. So I'll leave the rest of the questions for post, but the primary question I asked at the start for everyone to think about was, what did you feel? How did you feel about the Pirates' new way of structuring the POVs, and how do you think it could be used to improve the older chapters? Does anyone have anything to say about that? Descanter, you're up.
Yep. So I liked the structure of them. I don't know if it could be used to improve older chapters though, because one of the things that I like is how the different POV structures give different feelings to the different arcs. So it's not something that I think I would want to necessarily see become a new standard, or if it is, that I'd still want there to be, I'd want it to change between the different styles of POV, because this one, this feels a lot different. This feels like sort of this feels like a war stories and journal, almost kind of a journal log, Intinium Wars kind of thing. um than the flashback sequence of heist or other things. They all feel different, and I think that's a good thing. So I want them to keep on using different structures.
But do you think the experimentation was a success in improving some of the? What I've always felt is it's sometimes difficult to follow Pirate through their transition between POVs. Do you think this improved that transitional nature between POVs and made it more clear and crisp? Because that's what I was coming from.
I think it did. I think it did make it. I think it did make it a little more clear, but sometimes I kind of like the mystery of where we are and who's talking. I think that can help things sometimes.
Okay. Adrian Gray says, I liked it. Pirates writing can get a little difficult to follow without editing, so more structure is good. Valderon says, no, I didn't like it. Felt like the old show Jag. All it was missing was the Zulu time. It could work to emphasize a tone in a specific chapter, but not in general. Hairphrase says it did feel more clear. Kainen's typing. Mr. Wiggles, you want to say something?
I definitely enjoyed it for this chapter in terms of how it helped the structure. But I do agree with what others are saying, that I feel that overall it's not something that needs to be in every chapter. It just, for some chapters with distinctive storylines for distinctive characters, it helps a lot with going between each of those storylines. But in a more chaotic chapter, like something like the chat chapter 8.61, that it wouldn't have worked there in terms of how that was structured. So I definitely think there are times and places to use it, but it's a good addition overall.
Do you think it could have been applied to let's do a Wayback Machine and go back to say volume 3 or volume 2 and look back at the chapters where Pirate had significant conversations and movements between a variety of characters. It was usually consistently one POV each time. Would this have helped break down the chapter more? Not necessarily using um like a person as a dividing line, switching between POVs, but perhaps switching between events and places, doing like a label saying the later that, like, you know how SpongeBob does it 10 hours later, whatever that French meme is. I always forget it. um I'm gonna go through some responses and then we're gonna get to Rosie. Paraphrase says it would make the story more accessible to the mainstream audience as it can be off-putting. Can you clarify what off-putting means in chat? Because we're going to do this really fast. Kyan says, I feel that the tags work really well with this arc, similar to Disc's journal log. But I don't think they would remove the problem, at least for me, where POVs can get muddled. What is the problem that you identify as the issue when POV gets muddled? Where does it get muddled for you? Chexmaster says also Seaborn proved ant religion is okay. That's about something else. Edmund says Edmund Alcorn says I think the tags are too spoil-ish. I feel like the editor sort of put pirate up to it, but I like trying to guess who the POV is. You enjoy trying to guess the POV? Okay. Adrian Gray says, I agree with Wiggles, actually. This structure wouldn't have worked nearly as well in a more plot or world building focused chapter that didn't just swap between POVs. DM Crass posted the meme I'm talking about where it's 3 weeks later or many months later. Yeah. I was thinking about it more from a temporal standpoint, removing the point by point, people by people perspective and just shifting it to time or to a different structural point, just as a spine for the chapter. Rosie, why don't you go ahead? There's a lot more people typing, so we'll just wait for them to finish up.
All right. I mean, I think for this specific device that I was trying, it's a thing of like a tool for a different occasion. And I think this was the right occasion to use it. I see the switching of POVs as something that worked really well for a situation like this, where it's a large event happening over a decent amount of period of time, and we have multiple main characters. So you're seeing the whole of the event, you're visiting different characters. So we're not sitting with the lesson this entire time being like, what's happening with Belgrade or what's happening with Embria. And then we have to wait, to see that, or we don't get to see it. I think it tells a big story in small chunks, which also helps break something like this up. So I think there's other places that would have definitely worked really well for. Perhaps for No Mood, it would work really well. This might have worked really well in that chapter with Niers and the what's it called, the Fellowship of the Inn. I think this would also work extremely well if we do end up getting the Horns Throwdown in Palmley with all the different armies interacting. Basically, I think when Pirate has either a big event that has a lot of different characters happening, this is a great way to show multiple sides of the event, to make sure people don't get too fatigued from one perspective, to make sure people get to see multiple perspectives. And I think obviously we may see it a lot in these last few chapters because these are a lot of big culmination events, but for the day-to-day chapters, I agree. I don't think this would necessarily work.
That's true, but here's a question for you, Rosie, specifically. So this tool might not work for all situations, clearly, but do you think Pirate should use more tools to improve the connective tissue between the various POVs and shifts in dialogue? Should they be
Absolutely.
yeah. And oh, sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Sorry, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
I just mean like, and what and as an addendum to that, what might you, what could you think of that could improve like could be used as a tool that would work similar to this?
I can say for me, one thing I've always loved about serials is authors, experimenting with themes, things, whether that's a theme. I really loved when Pirate did a few of those chapters, a theme that ran through like children or something. Um, I really think it's more of considering what is now that there's so much setup and there's so many characters, it's what is happening, what is the best way to tell the story. So, for example, I really am thinking, at first I was thinking this would be a good tool for the Luan, Frerlings, whatever's going on with that. But thinking of like how that's going, the characters existing, I'm not entirely sure if this would be the right tool, but I think just telling it straight up like a normal chapter that we've experienced, X person's perspective may also not work perfectly well. So I think it's more of considering, maybe thinking ahead, what is this chapter? What is the kind of, not story it's trying to tell, but what is the thing that's going on? And what is the best way to get across the point of the thing, the various perspectives, the perspectives that are important, the things that are important, or to obfuscate those things. This could also be a great tool to obfuscate,
That's
hide,
what I was thinking
tiny
about. Like,
Chekhov's guns.
yeah, Pirate inherently obfuscates a lot using their kind of unique way of shifting through dialogue and POVs and this kind of you're reading through the first person POV or even third person POV of a particular character, but there's these little drop ins that feels like it's a narrative. Like the narrator is dropping in into the story and saying something and being clever, and it kind of draws the eye, and it's a very cool tool, but it can also cause confusion if you're not used to it. It took me a while to adjust to that level of interactivity in Pirates prose. I hope that people are interested in this and this isn't boring, but I really wanted to dig into this. Lewd Dancer, we're going to get through some comments, and if anybody wants to speak, remember, just ping me. Lewd Dancer says, I thought that this structure works for a very particular sort of story being told. If we are being introduced to multiple characters, some of whom may display similar characteristics, viewing the same set of events, it can be useful. Otherwise, I don't think it's necessary and can be a crutch. Different viewpoints should sound different. Yoda's Lewd Dancer, are you referring specifically to the character POVs being different enough that when Pirate doesn't use this structure, or I'll say it, maybe you can call it a gimmick, but what if they don't use it? That without it, it should challenge you to look for the distinctive pros and the distinctive POVs, and that's how you can connect with the story. Is that am I getting that as far as what you're trying to say? If not, just tell me I'm being stupid. Yoda's, I didn't particularly like the format, but I think it works for fight scenes where we are seeing different perspectives of the same event. That's a good point of view in that this tool might not be great for everything, but especially for fight scenes, it could help a lot. And I've read before Pirate commenting that they don't enjoy writing fight scenes, but I actually think it might not, because I've always felt like fight scenes should be like a give and take. The best fight scenes I've seen mangas and animes and like real life stuff and book stuff. The best fight scenes for me are the ones that manage to create like a through line throughout it, something that you can focus on, and then revolving everything around the focus. I've never really enjoyed like reading a fight scene. Is very difficult. This could be a good thing. Valderon says there is a meta text there of how Olisum might think, how he organizes his thoughts. It might be useful in a case like that too. That's also a good point. The metatextual use of this kind of structure, it allows you to create a background thing. If it is to be read like a journal, somebody is writing it, right? Perhaps that kind of callback is also very useful. And Edmund Alcorn, in response to my prior question about his comment before, says he linked chapter 7.23 LM is one of the best examples of pirates switching POVs that blend into one another seamlessly. Okay, and Whitebeard Forever says this style helped cut out transitions between characters in what is already a long chapter. Coldbringer responds, POV switching to different perspectives in the same battle, bold in names, etc. It has been done in many war stories before. This wasn't a bad implementation. It wasn't a great implementation. It was a step forward. The chapter would have been more difficult to follow without this step being done. Joe Abercrombie, yes, absolutely, famously did this in the book The Heroes. That is a very good example of it. I completely forgot to include other like folks. I'm used to the Lois McMaster Bujold school of shifting between characters where they stick with one person but sort of pop into other ones in between, doing like short POV jumps. Um, but staying consistently on one main character. But Joe did that really well in The Heroes. If you ever want to check that out, Cole's pointed out something good. That's a good example of it. Whitebeard Forever says it also works well as a transition between different locations, characters, and plot thread. Which is what I was saying before. Like, you don't necessarily have to use it as a POV swap, but you can use it uh as the SpongeBob thing where you use it to track time or to track a location or to track just whatever the hell you want. You can even confuse the fuck out of us with it. Paraphrase notes, I appreciate discussing about the technicals of writing as I suck at it. Yeah. I like talking about this. It's fun. Um, Coldbringer response to that, it works flows best when there is a direct observable transversity of causality, the ability to see and follow the flow of cause in one POV and the effects in the next POV, so on and so forth, half a dozen times or more. For example, an archer loosing an arrow in one POV and killing the next POV a few pages later, but not before he in turn sets up the next POV. I think I understand what you're saying, and I love that the abilities set up a sequential piece of events, but then separate that sequence into various structural points so that it's sort of mishmash. You can feel the flow of all of it coming together, but it's all like builds narratively, even though everything there is there, all the pieces are there for a sequential narrative. Um, Lou Dancer responded to his own prior comment where he mentions that this structure works for a very particular sort of story and says, in response to my question redirecting Oshi, in particular, I was trying to say that this shouldn't be the only thing used to distinguish POVs. When the POVs are similar background viewing the same events, I can see it being helpful, but wouldn't use it broadly. I would agree that it should be used broadly, but any tools the pirate uses to clarify transition between varieties of POVs is I wouldn't say significant, but a step forward, as Coldbringer noted. Rhythm and Blues Discanter says, I don't know if it would have been harder to follow with the standard TWI style, but I like that it gave this chapter and arc maybe a distinctive feel. Absolutely. Kynan says to my question about his earlier comment about the tags working well is for me, POVs can often get muddled during big moments where Pirate Abba switches between POVs for a couple of hundred words at a time, and it's not clear that this is happening. Cutting into those moments, which are usually climactic or frantic moments, with the tags of this chapter would take me out a bit every time it happened. The tags are good here, but possibly less effective in, for example, the Wistrom heist, or in a specific scene from Brave Song that I don't think I can mention. Good point. No spoilers, please. But good example. Whitebeard Forever says this might work fine in text form, but do we think this will work well in audiobook form? That's a good point, Whitebeard. We can consider this from Andrea's point of view. Lynette, Kel, you guys are big audio fans, big audio. Andrea, do you think that this kind of POV scene breaking would work for them? Because the one time I did try to read an audiobook was a who's that mill sci-fi writer who writes the Honor Harrington series. He wrote this one uh backup, this other series that was all like every POV would have like a date, a time, a thing. David Weber, that's right. And it was the Safehold series. And I just could not get into the audiobooks in the first place. Maybe I'm not the right audience. But they did do this thing where they would quote the time, the place, and the location before each POV would come up. Lynette and Kel respond to my question. Oh yeah, Lynette says she wouldn't have a problem with it, and Kel says Maven will be fine with it. Okay. Valderon says David Weber to my thing. Weird that I've never read any of them, and I got that. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna give a few moments for folks to just tell me if they have a particular comment on this that I haven't been able to think of or that hasn't been spoken of. And we'll just wrap up. Otherwise, hold on. I think I got a general sense that this chapter was, for me at least, a good start. It was like at the end of it, I realized that uh, folks were getting a piece of the story. The moment they ended it with the 2 months line. And I wanted to add, I didn't add this to the document or anywhere because this was going to be my little surprise at the end. So, as a final question, who do you guys think has the biggest weapon out of everybody here? Out of all the characters represented, who's got the biggest weapon? Do you think it's Calruse or well, just a question to ask. I mean, Calruse is 6 feet tall, but these drakes, you never know. Lynette, don't pretend you're an old shy lady. You know what you're doing. You're the one who put that question in. I don't have to define anything. It's what you choose from the smorgasbord of definitions of weapon. English is a variable language, and interpretation is allowed. Coldbringer says Cowman needs 2 hands to use any truly big weapons. He's got a hatchet at most. Adrian Gray says Calruse is a very large man. Lynette says, I choose the brain. Awesome. Rosie says, more obviously, he's a grower and a shower. Winky face. Cowman has skills, Cold. Cal responds. Whitebeard says, let's just say that Calruse still has 2 arms. In Riza, the Minotaur King from Edmund. Everyone's going with Calruse here. I think we should just do a poll afterwards and just see where it leads us down. But I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. Thank you to the listeners for listening. Remember, we're coming back next time. We'll do part 2 of it. It will be Mr. Wiggles. We're going to have a post discussion, post talk, where we'll be a little bit freer.
All right, that wraps us up today, guys. Hope you enjoyed the discussion with TWI Talks after chapter discussions. Check out some of our other videos and hope to see you next time.